with giving Richard Walker a big round of applause. Thanks so much, Richard. We appreciate all that you are doing. Tonight we'll have a discussion about next steps in thinking about policy, activism right here in Virginia. How do we move forward from this General Assembly session, especially in light of Virginia's history of discrimination, of racism, of inequality? So tonight we're going to have that discussion together as a group. We're going to start off with introductions for our panelists. Then we'll move into really digging down into what those next steps are. While the panelists are having their discussion, I want to encourage each and every one of you to be sure that you grab an index card from the back table to make sure you're jotting down your questions. Because after the panelists speak, we're going to have a short break and we'll reconvene with your questions, so you will be a part of the discussion tonight. But before we get started, I wanted to turn the mic over to Richard Walker to give us a little bit more information about the purpose for tonight and how the evening came to be. Richard?
I'm glad you all can make it. I've been believing for 100 folks to be up in here, but the ones that are supposed to be here are here. Bridging the Gap in Virginia, we started in 2009 as activists for formerly and currently incarcerated convicted felons, of which that's my story. I'm a formerly incarcerated convicted felon, released from the State Department of Corrections as well as the Federal Bureau of Prison back in 2005. As a direct result of me not being able to get gainfully employed, that's with a college degree and with 10 years of middle management, because I was being judged on my criminal background as opposed to my skills, my knowledge, and my ability to perform any duty, any job here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's my story. So that's where Bridging the Gap Virginia came out of, because I know there are individuals that have less than a high school diploma or GED that are incarcerated, and coming out of incarceration would have more of a challenge to be gainfully employed. And here that was in 2005. It hasn't gotten any better here in 2019. There is a governor that touts his horn about the overabundance of jobs that are available for individuals. However, individuals that come out of incarceration can go through any workforce development training program, get whatever certifications they might want to get obtained, and still cannot get employed because they're still being judged by their criminal background. I was instrumental in getting the ban the box issue or fair chance hiring ordinance passed here in the city of Richmond, as well as a part of a group that went to Governor McCullough to get it as statewide. So there's approximately 20 different jurisdictions and municipalities right now that have that ban the box fair chance hiring, where you can apply for a position in Virginia Beach, the municipality, and that box will not be there. That you can at least get a face-to-face one-on-one interview with a potential employer. The purpose of this evening is, I'm going to be quite frank, hold the governor accountable. Yes. All right, that's the purpose, is to come up with next steps that he can take action on to help resolve and change the atmosphere of racism in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia is ranked in the top 25 of the most racist states in the country. It's time for it to change. That whole incident with the blackface and the Ku Klux Klan clucker outfit that he had on, he, admittedly said that neither one of them is him. I spent several $million in trying to disprove it. And then going on this rhetorical reconciliation tour that is just talking about nothing. It's time for him to show some action as how he really wants to atone for his sins. I'm that guy that I'm tired of sitting in on meetings after meetings after meetings, talking about the problem without moving forward on the solutions. And that's where this came out of. It's time to find the solutions to exchanges. The first next step that I truly believe, and I'm sure a whole lot of folk in here are not aware. Anyone in here knows who Carter Glass is? I didn't think so. Carter Glass was a Republican delegate in the Commonwealth of Virginia back in 1902, when the Constitution, there was a convention for the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Carter Glass essentially said, by disenfranchising individuals through felony convictions is a way to eliminate the darky from our government. My first next step, and this has not been denounced by any administration since, the first next step that I'm looking for is for this governor to denounce this statement by Carter Glass publicly. Because it has not changed. It's still Jim Crow going on in Virginia. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I graduated from Virginia State University back in 81. Since coming back here in 1998, and I grew up around white folks, didn't have a problem with that. I feel sorry for a lot of folk that grew up here in Virginia that had to deal with the discrimination on a regular basis, segregation and the whole integration, which was a complete start of segregation again. You know, so since being down there, I've been here for 20 years, and I despise the way black folks, people of color, formerly incarcerated, convicted felons, individuals that made mistakes in their life, how they're being treated. And that's in all facets, whether it be in criminal justice system, whether it be in mental health system, whether it be in the education system, whether it be in any other system in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is geared toward relegating primarily people of color and a elimination of participation in trying to have a better quality of life in Virginia. It has to stop. This is the opportunity, the window of opportunity for it to happen, for us to make it stop. You know, I'm caught up in another fight, and many of you know, in Buckingham County and Union Hill, with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. You know, that's another facet of stuff that needs to stop as a direct result of Governor McCullough receiving funding from political campaign money from Dominion. He initiated this pipeline madness with Dominion because he was in the pocket of Dominion. And then here comes Northern, who also sidelined with Dominion, is in the pocket of Dominion. And as far as I'm concerned, that is environmental racism. They took a predominantly African-American community and they took advantage of the folk there because they're living under the poverty level and because they're a small number. And they took cold-blooded advantage of them to build this pipeline. We were already living on my family's property under the Transco pipeline. Now here they come again wanting to add another pipeline onto our family land. You know, my great-great-grandfather, Taylor Harper, was a free slave that purchased this land in 1885 for $15 in Union Hill. They wanted easement in order to connect the Transco line to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We're currently in federal district court down in Roanoke, fighting the eminent domain. I'm just not laying down, my family's not laying down, and we're not allowing Dominion to dangle a carrot in our face that they can buy us off. We're not going to allow this governor to get a pass. Right now, he's on a fast track for a pass. He's being very protected by the Democratic Party of the state of Virginia.
Tom Farrell
he's in the pocket of Tom Farrell. That's the problem. But at the same time, they're protecting him. That's why he has been turning down the letter that I have there, please. He's been turning down any appearances. All right, here we go. Here in Virginia, we are not satisfied with it. I'll stop where you were. Here in Virginia, we are not satisfied by a few $1 million. All right, we are not satisfied with a governor who ignores the cries of residents in Buckingham and replaces board members who may be sympathetic to our cry. And will never be satisfied with a governor who maintains his unwavering support of this unjust racist project. We have a governor who still believes that he's the best person to lead this state out of its current racial division, even though he's the one who caused it. Setting aside the maddening level of arrogance for a moment, Governor Northam, if you want to help right or wrong, you can start with Union Hill. Reverse your position and demand that Dominion move its compressor station. We cannot begin to resolve the inequities in our environment at large if we don't tackle underlying racial disparities that exist in our communities, in housing, and employment within our political structure. There's an old saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And there are a lot of good men that have done nothing to change this for over 400 years. 400 years. I'm not going back to 1902, I'm going back before then. Virginia has not given up its legacy of slavery. They're still enslaving folk that might make a mistake in life, and keeping them in a relegated, less than quality of life. Next slide, please. Okay, that's not for me then, huh? Oh, yeah, the one after this, I'm sorry. This is the letter that I sent to the governor. To invite him here this evening. As a result of me getting my rights restored by Governor McDonald back in 2012, I was a part of the governor's stakeholders group for restoration of rights, and had been under McDonald and then again under McAuliffe and now under Northam. Kelly Thomason, who was the former Governor McAuliffe's Secretary of the Commonwealth, who is now the Secretary of the Commonwealth under Northam. After sending this letter, she called me and said, Richard, unfortunately, the governor cannot make it. And she could not provide me a reason, rhyme, or rationale as to why not.
He's busy.
Yes. That he has a previous engagement. So I sort of kind of was expecting that anyway. However, at the conclusion of us creating the next steps, we will have this published. We will have this acknowledged by him that he turned it down. I've sent it to 3 newspapers already. The same exact letter. And looking forward to it being published by one of them. I'm almost determined to walk across the street to get Channel 6 to come on over here. And that's been politicized. A lot of the TV stations and a lot of the media do not touch stuff that is going against what they feel within their administrative responsibilities. So I wasn't expecting a lot of coverage because they too are not trying to promote negative issues following the Governor Northam. I'm not no conspiracy theorist, but I truly believe there's some kind of conspiracy going on to protect him, to keep them in there, and for the long haul when it comes to the next election, keep that opinion to myself. But I truly believe somebody being made a scapegoat. Yes, ma'am.
You skipped your hearing slide.
Oh, okay. Go back to, he's another one. He just filed a lawsuit, which the governor just signed 2 weeks ago at the extension of the Legislative Assembly, that he signed for individuals that owe fines and fees, for court fines and fees, to not deny them their driver's license. He just signed that, and I looked at that as a patronizing gesture without mentioning the exact nature of where that came from, which was a part of the racism that exists in Virginia. He wouldn't acknowledge that but he did make the gesture of signing a bill to allow fines and fees not to prevent an individual from getting their driving privileges. That as long as their convictions and their fines and fees have nothing to do with traffic or with driving. And then here comes Herring, and he has since filed a lawsuit with the federal court to stop the governor from signing the bill to allow for driver's license. I'm a little confused on this because I don't know if the current situation, from what I'm understanding, it didn't need the governor to sign it, but it needed just for him to stop it. So there's some confusing stuff going on. I invited him to, of course, you know, he had one of his minions call me as well, that he couldn't make it. So that's why I gathered the experts here. There's issues surrounding restoration of rights, Constitution Amendment. Can we go to the bills, please? Constitution Amendment that has been sitting there on the table forever. Then there's solitary confinement. When I was incarcerated, between Henrico County taking me out of the mental ward at Richmond Community Hospital and transporting me down to Riverside Regional, when I got to Riverside Regional, because I hadn't done anything there, I tried to kick the window out in Henrico County. So they deemed me to have a mental issue. So when they took me down to Riverside Regional, they had in the Sally Port the goon squad in full riot gear waiting for me to come in. No sooner than I got in, they put me in that, you know, mobilization chair that I couldn't move. And then they carried me into the segregation, and I spent 45 days in segregation. Virginia's laws, and I'm going to have someone speak on it more importantly, for putting people in solitary confinement is completely out of whack. Department of Corrections and these regional jails. It took a doctor to come in to say that they better release me. You know, you can become mentally ill as a direct result of being isolated in solitary confinement. That's a practice that has gone on too long in the Commonwealth of Virginia that has to stop. Where is the accountability of these wardens and these prisons and the Department of Corrections? You gotta be careful. Anybody here from DOC? I'm a statewide volunteer. I don't want them to revoke my certification from going into prisons. So all of these bills that you'll see, parole. There's a debate on the table whether parole should be reinstituted back in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Who knows? The issue of fishback, where judges were instructing jurors when they asked the parole had been abolished in 1995. The individuals that took a trial by jury, the jurors were not told that parole had been abolished. I got individuals up in Buckingham that have spent 40 plus years incarcerated as a direct result of this issue, because they did not work, the jury was not informed that parole had been abolished. And a lot of jurors, we have it in written statements, they said, if I'd known that parole had been abolished, I would not have voted for him to get all this time. And that's in the legislation that they said, oops, we made a mistake, but they are dragging their feet to correct it. As far as I'm concerned, that's got something to do with the racial disposition. You know, there's a couple of gentlemen that are in the subcommittee on courts of justice. They have to go. They have to go. These are individuals that year after year in the General Assembly, any of these bills that you see here, they have voted them down. They have not been able to get out of committee. to get rid of them. I have a young lady sitting here in the front row, Elizabeth Alcorn, who is running against one of these individuals. I'm not supposed to be political, I'm a nonprofit, so I'm trying to avoid that.
You can't call his name?
Yeah, I can. She's running against,
Just gotta make it sound.
yeah, she's running against Todd Bell. Rob Bell. Rob Bell has to go.
Good Lord.
Todd Gilbert has to go. All right, these individuals are disallowing progress for change of the racial atmosphere of the Commonwealth of Virginia. They have to get out of town. All right, I'm talking too much, so we need to go on further. It's gotten to the point, but these bills will be here. I know a lot of folk, I know Kim Bobo has done through her organization a lot with addressing these bills. I see them on a regular basis in the General Assembly on a whole number of bills. I also want to acknowledge Ms. Snodgrass, Kimberly Jenkins Snodgrass, who's with the Interfaith Action for Human Rights. And they have been fighting issues regarding solitary confinement, minimums. Please, real quick, Mr. Snodgrass.
Good evening, I'm Kimberly Jenkins Snodgrass, Vice Chair of Interfaith Action for Human Rights. We successfully passed Bill HB 1642, which is requiring the Virginia Department of Correction to do data reporting for who they put into solitary confinement. That's history. They gutted the bill, but the main thing is we have made them sit to the table and have accountability. That's quick.
That's quick, thank you. So, and like I said, there's a plethora of bills that directly affect African-American males in the Commonwealth of Virginia that has to stop. You know, I appreciate you folk here from moving forward before the night's out. We're at the end. If you have your questions for the panelists, you'll be welcome, or anyone in here that you think can answer your question. I'm going to turn it back over to Kendall, I think.
Have our panelists briefly introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Dr. Leonard Edlow, who is the pastor of New Hope Fellowship, and as well as a retired pharmacist and longtime activist.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here. Like you said, most people know the pharmacist who ran all the pharmacy in Churchill and Southside, and but I'm also a pastor. But I've done a whole lot in pharmacy. I've led the profession nationally, and in the last few years I've really been involved with legal rejection. Pharmacy was one of the last professions that said it was unethical for pharmacists to be involved in injections. And so I had a run going with both Governor McCauley, with my op-ed piece in the North Virginia Highlight, the Richmond Times especially, with shielding the pharmacists who are involved in lethal injection. Not only doing that, but they are not governed by the rules of the Board of Pharmacy. And many of you saw 60 Minutes last night, story on fentanyl, and it's my contention because not only am I involved here in Richmond, but we just did an amicus brief with the Supreme Court. We've been involved with Texas. We feel that some of these drugs are being imported because drugs made by legitimate manufacturers cannot be used, that they might be coming from these very same companies that are producing these illegal drugs that come into the country. And so I'm a lot of places. I've taught in pharmacy, I've taught in theology, and so I bring a different perspective, but I'm so glad to be a part of this distinguished panel of ladies.
Well, we're happy to have you too, Dr. Leonard. Next up is Dr. Zoe Spencer. She is the CEO of Diverse Relations Group, as well as being a professor of sociology at Virginia State University. I'll keep it kind of short because this is not about me, but I want to introduce myself to the extent that will qualify some of the probably radical answers that I will, and responses that I will give to the questions. Beyond the doctor and all that stuff, first, I am a Black woman from Berry Farms projects in Southeast Washington, D.C. I am an activist before I am a scholar. My role as a professor is really a part of my activist work. I do civil rights activism. I have done work around the Castle Doctrine, Stand Your Ground, the deaths of Mike Brown, also Freddie Gray. I've recently been inducted into this new special education advocacy at the behest of my sister Lorraine Wright and my other warrior sister Candace Lucas. I do work in the prisons. I've been at Buckingham, Powhatan, Nottoway, Virginia Women's, Richmond City Jail, and so my activism is vast, and so I come to you not just as a scholar, but more importantly as an activist who has placed her scholarship at the forefront of her work. So. Our next panelist is Lorraine Wright. She is the CEO and Executive Director of I Vote for Me. Is that right?
That is me. Thank you very much. So thank you all for having me here. Richard Walker, my good friend for years and years and years. When I launched I Vote for Me in 2015, Richard Walker is one of the speakers at my launch event on Broad Street. So this is full circle, and I'm really glad to be here. But just a little bit about I Vote for Me. We are a nonprofit based here in Richmond, Virginia, that's premised on self-advocacy and the protection of human rights. And that comes by way of knowledge transfer, right? Because what we need is organic, self-sustaining change, meaningful change. I'm not here to, drop a couple of one-liners. What we are here to do is transform communities, and we're going to talk about how we do that. And I'm going to speak a little bit about what Richard said about the governor and reconciliation. We'll talk about that in a little while, but the change is going to start here and not there.
Panelist is Dr. Mary Finley Brooke. She is an associate professor at University of Richmond, focusing on environmental studies. Mary?
I am so honored to be here. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I will certainly talk about the very token and ineffective Virginia Governor's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, the transition into potentially an equally or more token and less effective Virginia Council on Environmental Justice that's being created. I really think there's a structural problem with the way these citizen councils are being created, and I've learned firsthand as being on one of those last year. And then I also want to talk about my role, and I work with Kendall very closely on this, with the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and the 20 organizations, we're up to about 22, 23 now, grassroots and other organizations across the state of Virginia that are working on environmental justice issues. So that's the perspective I'll be coming from, specifically targeting environmental justice.
And last but not least, we have Kim Bobo. Could you scoot back up to the bios? To the bios?
I think it got perfect. Maybe down one more. Yeah, there we go.
Thanks, Kim Bobo, who's the co-executive director of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy.
And we're sharing a mic.
We are.
So I'm the director of the Virginia Interfaith Center. My career has really been focused on the intersection of faith and economic justice. And as I've done that work for a long time. And you can't do work in the economic justice arena and not recognize the incredibly embedded role that racism in this country plays with work, right? I mean, slavery was about work, right, and stealing people's wages. And so, again, I'm fairly new to Virginia. I've been here a little over 3 years, and the structure of work here is pretty bad, right? And I think it's completely completely related to our history. So I love the work that we're doing here, engaging particularly faith communities and other people's goodwill and trying to make a dent in what happens in the General Assembly. And again, it's a very accessible place on some level. I mean, it's very, you have the raw bells and the folks that can think, oh my word, nothing's going to change. And yet, things do change, right? We saw Medicaid expansion last year. So anyway, I'm excited to talk about what I think are some of the opportunities going forward.
Thank you.
Excuse me, one thing I wanted to note, before we really dig into the question of what our next steps are, is that this year is a very important year. It marks 400 years since the first enslaved Africans were brought to Hampton Roads, 400 years, 2019. And as Richard Walker and many of our panelists through their introductions brought up, we are still very much facing the many, many faces of racism here today. So our question for this evening, and again, I want to remind you all to feel free to be conversational. Oh, yes.
Can you look back about 10 inches, because you have a spread across your face and we want to take pictures of you.
Do I still have a shadow? Do I still have a shadow?
No, your shadow is gone.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. You're ready.
I was very funny in those pictures. So the question that we are discussing tonight is, in your opinion, what are the priority next steps coming out of the General Assembly session? And of course, we're thinking about this in context of Virginia's painful past, especially regarding the issue of racism. So I don't know who wants to kick off the conversation, but Kim, just let me know if you'd like.
So I think I'll start just because for me, I have to frame this a little bit differently. So before I can talk about next steps, I really have to make sure that we're all clear on the historical facts, right? So, Mr. Walker mentioned the governor's reconciliation tour. Well, if you can remember the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings in South Africa, you understand that you can't have the reconciliation piece without the truth. And so what Virginia is still not done, what this governor has still not done, is told the truth and be honest and realize that in these Truth and Reconciliation Committee hearings, in order for the perpetrators of the atrocities of apartheid to be granted amnesty, there were only two conditions. One, that the victims were basically persecuted for political purposes, and the second was that the whole and entire truth had to be told in terms of their confession. Virginia is not willing to do that. So the basis for wherever we move forward or where we're moving next is really not going to be substantial because it's not on a solid foundation. Virginia is not being truthful about its past, about where we come from, about its part in these atrocities. And I call them atrocities because they are violations of human rights, of civil rights, and they continue to this day. So when Richard talked about Jim Crow, mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. You read Michelle Alexander's book. I'm going to speak predominantly on education today, and Virginia is #1 in the nation for school-based referrals to the criminal justice system. So how can we justify spending close to, if not more than $200,000 a year to incarcerate a juvenile, yet less than $12,000 a year to educate people? All I'm saying is that Virginia's priorities are clear, and so when we talk about the General Assembly, when we talk about these legislative bodies, we need to be real also in our expectations because their pattern of behavior is documented.
And I'll put on my other hat as a theologian. because when you believe, and God believes, you believe. And so we've been taught theologically that slavery was okay. And that was never untaught. And so that white supremacy, just goes on that we are. And we see it in so many aspects of life. I mean, it affects finances, it affects health, education, even politics. And then I always look at things from both sides. But as Black people, we have to want to change things. And we really have to be aware of what's going on. I served as chair of the retail merchants of Richmond for 2 years. I sat at the head of the table in the boardroom. And because I was numb, this white supremacy and this Confederacy thing, just got inside of me, that I paid no attention to the pictures of all the statues along the wall. But when the discussion came up and I walked in the room as a former board member, I said, oh my God, I've said and condoned this. I mean, for years I was an interim pastor on the South Side, and whenever we had an evening program, I'd go to Ruth Chris, and I never even saw the statues in there. And so now I no longer go to the one in Richmond. I'll go to DC and Virginia Beach, but not here. And we see these things as Black people, accept them. I mean, we didn't post them on Facebook. I met Ruth Chris that supported, through its pictures, because the picture is stronger than anything. So we got to unteach it and then unteach this theology to white people, because I was in a group the other week, and the director of the Baptist General Association of Virginia, he proudly said, we started the Southern Baptists. Now, in 2019, that's a statement that no one should be proud of, that we divided the nation, because remember, the churches separated before the country did. The Methodists, the Baptists, the Presbyterian, all that happened in 1845. And then the states separated in 1861. So you see how important this religious aspect is. And that's why, I had a man come to my church. He's like, you've been coming and coming. And on 4th Sunday, we have a litany and we talk about slavery. And he sent me a note and said, I needed to take that out of the litany. And I told him, we have to understand our history. We have to know our history. He never been back. I mean, he gave good, but the money got work. You got to stand on principle.
Go ahead. So I wanted to kind of piggyback, and I'm going to try to run through it, because I think before we can move on to next steps, we have to really understand the history and the historic context that we exist in. And that goes to, sis, what you were saying about truth. So I wanted to start with the truth, because the truth is that this country is built on 3 ideologies: white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, period. And those 3 ideologies are embedded in our institutions. So when we talk about racism, I think oftentimes we come to these discussions and people talk about racism as if it's this thing that doesn't have a foundation and that grows without fruit. And so before we can even get to the General Assembly, we have to understand the ways in which white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism are embedded into our systems. And so when it comes to race, let's talk about what that looks like. White supremacy is an ideology that was really specifically designed to create this binary of white supremacy, Black inferiority, that was used to justify enslavement, the enslavement of African people in particular. African people were brought to this country for the purpose of providing free labor in order for this country to grow in its agricultural economy and be able to participate. White supremacy comes with white privilege, and so white people, even though they may not be the direct benefactors of that capitalist entity, they still benefit from white supremacy. Everybody wants to talk about racism until we really get down to the crux that in order to truly address the problem, we have to acknowledge that white supremacy is a fallacy. So slavery comes, you snatch African people from Africa, bring them to the shores of America in 1619, 400 years is very, very significant. We used and exploited and oppressed generations of African people in this country on the foundation of the that were designed to promote the oppression of a people. The 13th Amendment comes into play. You can't talk about mass incarceration until you go back to the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment isn't by accident, it's by design. They gave an out clause. Slavery shall be abolished unless an individual is duly convicted by law. Come on, man. And then after that, they take, when they need to reimpose, the North and the South are divided, when they need to reimpose slavery, what do? They create a series of black codes that are specifically designed to target the newly freed enslaved population for the purpose of reinstituting reenslavement. And then they implement the convict leasing system that allows former slave masters to go in and then pay up a small fine and then get their labor back, or send the labor to the mines in West Virginia or the railroads or wherever they need to use it. So we have to understand that. Then they implement Jim Crow to keep black people segregated, and that's the education piece. That black people from slavery are not supposed to read, and then Jim Crow keeping black people disenfranchised from the things that are essential to our survival, and that's based on the concept of white supremacy. So we have to understand that from 1619 to 2019, and the state of Virginia is principled. These are the shores where black people arrive. Now we can pretend like we live in this post-racial society and that there are no indicators, but when you start to look at all of the law, we're going to talk about it, all of the laws that are passed, everything that you posted here, all of the laws that they're passing, or the laws that they're trying to revoke, or the laws, the bills that are in place and they say yay or nay, it really is fundamental. I sit in court all day watching the correlation even between the prison industrial complex and the school to prison pipeline. Virginia has ranked #1 in the school to prison pipeline and the disparate discipline and sanctions of African American students, predominantly males with disabilities, but females also. So we have to look at, like, we can't pretend like, you can call it a conspiracy theory, but I am a socio-historian. And when you study history and you understand history, when you look at this contemporary phenomena, you can see that there is a direct 360 degrees. So before we can talk about the General Assembly, we have to really put it into a perspective to really understand whether this is a deliberate attempt, because Audre Lorde has a quote, "The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house." So that's the center of the General Assembly, and the governor is a conduit to that, and the judicial system is a conduit to that, and the educational system, which is comprised of over 80% white females, is a conduit to the re-enslavement of African people. We can sit in here and talk about it all day long, but our answer is not going to come from the General Assembly. It's going to come from grassroots mobilizing of the people, where we get together and we say enough.
Dr. Mary or Kim, do you all want to add anything to this discussion about foundations and the roots of the issues that we're still very much dealing with?
Well, so what I have to talk about is very current, and I really appreciate that historical perspective because it really sets the ground for everything that has to be discussed. What I would come to this discussion with is that we do not have any environmental justice law or policy at the federal level or at the state level. And that's one of the reasons, and I'll be straightforward about this, that I've spoken to many lawyers about the Union Hill case, and they tell me this is the strongest case of environmental racism that they've seen. They think we have the strongest chance of taking it to the Supreme Court and winning. And they also say there are no laws. We have no foundation to fight this. There are no laws to be able to, besides the civil rights law, which is foundational but decades old, we do not have environmental justice laws to show that rules were broken. And so when it comes to air, when it comes to water, when it comes to things that are poisoning communities, we know this happens disproportionately in communities of color. We're very clear on environmental racism when it comes to, contamination. And this is something that happens, it's very clear in Virginia. There is no question. But when we come down to it, we have no Virginian policy, we have no Virginian laws, we really don't have it at the federal level. We have an executive order, it has no teeth, there's no enforcement, there's no monitoring. But at this point, to even fight this, we are not even at the point where we can get it out of committee. We're not even at the point point we're having a serious discussion about how people are being poisoned, how they're being poisoned in their homes, how they're being poisoned in their work. It's going on and on. It's extreme, and we have not reconciled that history with the present reality of needing to have law and policy to be able to fight this stuff. I think it's an incredible tool. I think there's a lot that we can do with environmental justice law, but the truth of the matter is we don't have it. We do not have what we need to have in terms of the norms to be able to win in the courts. So we have to fight in the streets, as you're saying. We have to do a lot more than count on the General Assembly, because they think they've got it all figured out. They think we understand environmental justice. They think that there's really not a lot of room for improvement. I heard DEQ say even last week that they feel that they really made steps forward. What steps forward? There's not one law or policy. There was nothing that could be enforced. We have nothing. They've made no steps forward. They don't even recognize the problem. We're at -10. We're not even at 0 when it comes to the state, and that's true at the federal level as well. We have nothing in terms of like legislative action that we can stand on. So when you said, and I heard the word revolution over there, I mean, we really have to, there's no way that the General Assembly is going to get us there. They're not even asking the right questions. They don't even know the questions to ask. We've really got to look for other solutions, because I don't believe that these bills are going to make it out of committee, in which case we've got to change the structure of the committees, but we also need to be looking for other solutions.
Well, I do work in the General Assembly, but I do want to say, I'm fundamentally an organizer, right? And I think, and I've been involved in organizing for a very long time, and I think it's around, carefully looking at what are our opportunities and picking fights, and try to pick fights that lift up the issues that we care about, and that with good work we can get behind and win. Because people get discouraged when we're not seeing some wins. And it feels to me like the Buckingham fight is a fight. I don't know how we're going to win it, but it feels like one of those fights that we ought to just stand our ground, collectively build the power on it, and really see if we can win, because that will it will encourage people for other wins, right? So that feels like a fight for us all to be in. The election stuff, there's always opportunities on elections. Now, I know the disenfranchisement of voters in Virginia is bad, but again, there still were a lot of changes made in 2017. And so again, I think there's opportunities in a bunch of places in 2019. And I think we've got some very interesting fights at the Commonwealth Attorney level, where, again, the power these men and women have is just incredible in terms of locking people up. And you've seen reductions by 50% of people out in jail by changing a Commonwealth Attorney or District Attorney in other places. So again, it feels to me that we're seeing some really interesting fights in Fairfax and Arlington right now, and probably we'll see again another fight here. But again, those fights to me feel like really nice fights. It seems to me in the General Assembly, again, the challenge is, there's 3,000 bills, and, there's 500 good organizations, and we're working on 2,000 bills, right? Like, we're just kind of spread all over, and so we don't harness our forces well. And I feel like that's one of the things that happened differently last year on the Medicaid expansion fight, right? Which was clearly, almost, a gob of groups, and I want to acknowledge Kenneth Gilliam here in the room from TCI, who was the leader of that coalition for us. He was just a rock star on this, so thank you, Kenneth. It became the fight, not 100 fights last year, but it became the fight. And when we fight together, we do a lot better than when we are fighting all different battles. So I think as we were thinking about whether it's the General Assembly or some of these other fights, I think the challenge is, to try and find the handful of ones that we think we've got a shot at that will mobilize people that really reflect our values, and that with good organizing, we can win. Because it's that winning that gives us, the possibilities and the hope and the encouragement that will draw more people so we can win bigger things.
Thank you.
So I guess on the note of fights, what are some of the fights that you all are currently engaged in, or you see the most possibility for wins?
Education, because we talked and Zoe actually framed it as the school to prison pipeline, but again, there's a significant disproportionality of discipline, suspensions, and expulsions, not only in the state of Virginia, but nationwide, but again here, we're talking about Black children, especially Black boys, are suspended at a rate sometimes 6 and 7 times that of their white counterparts, and it is statistically, scientifically proven that Black kids don't misbehave more often, more seriously, more frequently than their white peers. So these are things that we absolutely have to pay attention to, because it goes directly to, and this is something actually that I sent to Kimberly to put on the slide, but the Hampton Plan. So we're talking about intentionality, right? The Hampton Plan, we have to frame this because we're in the Commonwealth of Virginia, this capital of the Confederacy, right? So the Hampton Plan, it was an education system designed in 1868. So Richard, this actually predates the Carter-Glass Conventional Constitution, 1902. But 3 prongs of the 1868 Hampton Plan: young Black men and women must not get a liberal arts education to include literature, philosophy, mathematics, because then that would also encourage strategic and critical thinking. But also, young Black men and women must not get training in trades or enterprises that will enable them to compete economically. And third, young Black men and women must internalize the fundamental principle that politics is white folks' only business. We see that here too. This is so evident in 2019, right here, right now. And Zoe talked specifically, and even if we looked at, I actually have handouts for you guys, so you can take some of this home. You can actually take a copy of this home. But from 1865 to 1870, you see 1865 there, the adoption of the 13th Amendment, right? But then, so with the adoption of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, therein instituted now the Black codes, right? So there was always a push, there was always a challenge, right? And so right after that, in 1866, there was the Civil Rights Act of 1866, right? Right? So but when the 1866 Civil Rights Act was adopted, then whites denied the civil rights of Black Americans. It's like, no, but you can't vote. So then in 1868, here, the adoption of the 14th Amendment, right? So after the 14th Amendment was adopted, that's when the Southern planters and the Northern laborers got together and came up with the 1868 Hampton Plan. So when we talk about being strategic and intentional, the systems we fight are strategic and intentional. And I think, Ms. Bobo, you talked about, and you probably didn't frame it this way, but the intersectionality. We can't talk about economic justice and food justice and education and all these other things without recognizing that these systems are working cooperatively. They're working together. So you can't address education without talking about food justice and economic justice.
Because I want to piggyback on what Lorraine said, and I'll probably be doing it all night. Because to pick a fight is problematic. Because to pick a fight means that you choose what's important. The fight is collective. Everything thrives off of each other. Environmental justice, education, politics, economics, religion, all of these systems thrive off of each other. And so where the system that the institutions are designed to sustain is an oppressive system that benefits from the oppression of a people, you can't pick one. You can't, and then the question is, who chooses what's important? The system is not going to allow itself to be used to dismantle its agenda. So when you're talking about environmental justice is fundamentally linked to capitalism. It's placed in communities of color so that it can thrive in an area
chance.
You know, we need to look at funding, because not only in urban areas, but in rural areas, that are poor. You know, children are suffering. And then, when I look at education, to me, and I have 2 degrees from historically black and 2 from predominant institutions, to me, the HBCUs are still too Eurocentric for me. So in other words, they will not address this white supremacy. And until that changes, I mean, you can't have this discussion in Richmond Public School.
That's right.
80% black. You can't have this discussion. You don't have it at Virginia Union. I'm at Howard. We don't have it at Howard. You know, we're proud that we're a black school, but as to addressing things, you know, this whole thing that was taught that civilization started in Europe. And then, you know, they flip it, the scientists find out, well, actually it started in Africa. And then they say, the cognitive moment did not occur until people moved out of Africa. All of these things, we don't deal with that until we start dealing with that and debunking that, and then only will, I worked in Churchill when I had my boss dealing with poor people. Now I fill in Howland Springs, where poor white people live. And they have the same problem. It's just as bad for them. The things that are killing us will kill them. But as long as they got this white supremacy thing, I'm just a little bit down. You know, just call it like it is. Until that fusion can come together. And the thing is, you know, capitalism is not going to allow that to happen.
No, absolutely.
See, that's why we have to address it. I mean, it's amazing how we let things be labeled and we run people away from it. And so this young lady from New York, you know, she's a socialist, so that's a problem, you know. And all of that affects us here, whether we want it or not. The young lady from Minnesota, you know, because she's saying things about the state that is apartheid. I mean, I teach the Jewishness of Jesus, but I do not believe in Zionism. But you know, we can't talk about it. I know, I'll be in the paper being talked about. But see, you know, we deal with our situation, but it's worldwide. I mean, colonialism did the same thing to people of color as slavery did in the United States. And so, you know, we've got a continent with all of these resources that we can't take advantage of because, you know, it's been raped. And then the minds, it's always about what we want, and because the minds were so messed up in Africa, those that are in charge keep things from happening. And you got the same thing here in the state of Virginia. You got black people who are elected to positions and won't make a change. I'm the first to be on this. I was on the conference committee, and you know, the state budget has all these billions of dollars, but black people still don't get 1% of that. So what good when you're sitting on it? You might want to get somebody else.
I'm such a firm believer that change is most effective when it's led by those that are impacted by the issues. Not casual participants, but led by. And so when we talk about everything that needs to happen, again, this is this grassroots effort. It's gonna take you, it's gonna take us collectively, because this is the thing. You can't stand on protections you don't know you have. You can't stand on premises and rights you don't know exist and how they work. So again, it's gonna have to be this knowledge transfer. I'm gonna have to sit down and let my sister or my church member or my neighbor understand exactly how this thing is working. Because again, this is systemic and systematic. And the intersectionality is not mutually exclusive. We can't divide it and just look at one thing.
And one more thing, you can't promise too much. I'm from the civil rights movement. I walk these streets, register people to vote, and vote at Racsim, all those things. And we promised people too much. And what happened in 1976? We instituted a majority black council. But what happened? The face has changed. but it was the same thing. And so to me, the worst thing is, you know, a white institution will black us off. And we have too much of that in too many institutions.
And too many times we're also looking for a singular leader in the black community, right? And so I'm all about servant leadership. We should all be doing something and figuring out how to build bench strength, how to teach somebody else exactly how to make this fight sustainable, because it probably will not be realized in our lifetimes. But again, we have to be working towards something that has to be a collective effort.
And real quick, because what you said, and I'm not going to use the R word because I'm already in trouble, and so I'm going to use the term transformation, and you can scream the R word for me. But true social transformation will only occur when we start to debunk the ideologies that sustain the oppressive system. And when you talk about the poor white people, you know, every great leader died, or not died, was assassinated, murdered, at the point when they started to promote cross-racial cooperation in promoting transformation. And the vision is important because the ideology of white supremacy and patriarchy both are probably some of the greatest ideologies to ever grace the planet, because it is the foundation for colonialism, it's the foundation for imperialism, it's the foundation for oppression in the United States. And the reality of it is that my theoretical perspective is that there are two classes of people: the people who own the means of production and control the wealth, and the people who have to sell their labor. And it doesn't matter what racial group you're in, if you are a part of that labor base, then you are suffering oppression. So when you talk about poor white people, and it's always interesting to me because, you know, I understand, you know, the psychology of it when you have nothing and then you're given this ideology that makes you, but in reality, the question is, what is the difference, aside from a microcosm of privilege, between poor white people and poor black people? We are still undergoing the same oppression, but until we understand and debunk the fallacy of white supremacy and the fallacy of patriarchy, and then get to the root of our oppression, which in my estimation is the way that capitalism, the oppression is necessary, and then we get together and really start having some real conversations, then we'll get together until each other's interests diverge. And then when I feel like you're about to get something that I don't have, or you feel like you're about to get something that I don't have, then all of a sudden we move back into that same space. And so I just think that we have to keep the root of the oppression and the root of the social problems at the forefront, and then we can move to a true transformative or revolutionary type. Come on.
We got that same problem with patriarchs. And then we say it's of the Bible. But the thing is, most of us are Christians and we follow Jesus, and he was all about women. Women were his disciples. Women were the first ones to preach. And then what happens? You pick up Paul, who's trying to get the church accepted by Rome, and Rome had probably the worst patriarchal system in the world. And so, you know, I call our Christians, I say, y'all Paul this. Y'all not Christians because y'all call Paul, not Jesus, who set women free. And the thing is, we gotta let go of this thing. You know, when God created humankind, he didn't create one part weaker than the other. And you know, the thing is, why is it? Because we can swing it, we so important. I mean, let's just be real about this. All of us are the same. And the thing that bothers me so, like with the last election, I had somebody who told me, and I mean, this just blew my mind, they could not vote for Hillary Clinton because it was not of the order of God.
Wow.
Yes, see, that's, you know, we don't.
Not of the order of God.
Yeah, see, we don't appreciate it. Like I said, if we believe God believes us, we got a problem.
Yeah.
And so much we've got to unteach. And, you know, in the black church, you know, I'm okay, so I'm a black sheep, I'm worse than a black sheep. Because I'm against all of this stuff that's messing people up, because it's messing us up financially, We supposed to stop and then do it? Hell no. We supposed to have a brother like it's just crazy. We supposed to be drinking 16, 19 in that language, knowing that language changed, but because Master gave us that power. We got more.
That's right. And I was talking to Zoe earlier, really quickly, and we were just talking about this collective effort. And, I told her, and I said, so many people are so hung up on this has to be either or. Why can't it be both and? And I can agree to disagree with you on a particular point. And guess what? Let's leave that right here. But let's be intentional about this here fighting what it is we have to do.
And I guess on the note of, well, of course, that, but I just want to remind our audience members to be sure you're writing down your questions, so you'll be able to share them with the panelists afterwards. So what I was about to say is that on the note of intentionality, I guess what are some examples that you all have seen of intersectional solutions that are giving you hope right now?
I'm going to start. I don't know how to talk to you, but please go over. So I don't know how many of you know or have the privilege to know Lily Estes before she passed. So she was such a beautiful soul, but she was the creative mind behind the Community Justice Film Series and the Community Justice Network. And it was talking about this particular thing. It was talking about the intersectionality between economics, transportation, job wealth creation, whole body well-being and wellness, and education, but it was also vastly premised on participatory democracy. It's about us creating and sustaining the change that we want to see. And so Lily gave us a really good framework for what this is supposed to look like. And when we talked about the impact, this is where we go to the Gilpin Courts, where Lily lived, and the Tenants Association meetings. That's where we're talking about people, or we're talking to people and their lived experience, and we're actually encouraging them to tell their story. I don't want to tell anybody's story. I don't need the narrative to be in my perspective or summarized according to whatever is my perception is. I need for you to tell your story for yourself in the way that you feel it, whatever vernacular you use, and that's what it's going to take. But Community Justice Network and Film Series, that was a great example of what it is we need to do.
And Dr. Barber with his movies, for poor people. That's a very important thing, and we aren't embracing that like we should. And he's trying to pick up with the Poor People's March that Martin Luther King did years ago. Fusion politics. If you ever get a chance to read the book, Reconstructing the Gospel, they talk about fusion politics and how people got together in North Carolina. Like you say, the system, that working system goes down. Yeah, I think that with technology, even though technology, we can use this cognitive science so much to mess up people, but technology, if you do it the right way, we can have some change.
So I wanted to pick up on that, just to remind people of an event that's happening March 17th. So we have the Poor People's March is coming back to Richmond. We're going to be marching across. May 17th. I apologize, midday, May 17th. So people from Union Hill are going to be walking the 75 miles from Union Hill to Richmond in a statement of protest in March. Is that not true?
They're taking the bus.
So some people are taking the bus. The intention was March, but it's become much more manageable, but we're crossing into Richmond on the 17th.
And Barbara will be here.
And Reverend Barber will be here for the 17th, and I believe there are events happening in DC as well, but the idea is very much to bring that national attention. I'll have to say, as much as I love that national attention, I worry that it drains from local movements. I worry that it brings a lot of attention to big figureheads. I think he's awesome. I was at those events. I really appreciated it in Buckingham. I worry about local movements. I worry about Virginia movements. And so while I think this is really great to get that national attention, I want to make sure that we're really healthy as a local and national movement. So we're excited to have that attention March 17th and 18th as a result of that national game. May 17th and 18th. We're going to march in May. Thank you, March in May.
central to the intersection. And, you know, we passed this bill this last General Assembly that basically removed some of the Jim Crow provisions from the Minimum Wage Act. If you read the Minimum Wage Act, which clearly not very many people had done for a long time, it exempted every category of worker that was historically held by African Americans. And, you know, again, we did the outreach on it to the General Assembly, and like no one in the General Assembly had any idea this was in the law. I mean, none of the Dems, it was just like, so again, it was the codification of racism into the laws. If anyone has questions if that really happens, it was there. And it's still there because, you know, we got rid of some of the exemptions, but the two largest ones for farm workers and domestic workers are still there. Right? There's a reason why domestic workers and farm workers were left out of the Fair Labor Standards Act, right? And it's because the southern states made the leaders in Congress remove those categories of workers because those were the historic slave cat jobs, right? And they're still, both those two are still in Virginia's minimum wage exemptions. Now, why logically should farm workers not be paid the minimum wage? Is there any rationale? Now, again, in Virginia right now, farm workers are mostly Latinx, but they still deserve the minimum wage, right? So again, I think, you know, we're going to try to go back on some of this stuff. There's a huge fight there. There's also, I spent the day the other day with the AFL-CIO in their kind of planning meeting, and really they're having an internal fight around whether to go after right to work. You look at the history on right to work and what states made right to work possible. The South, absolutely. So fighting against unions and the South go hand in hand. You know, again, I don't know whether that can be won in Virginia, but it would be really important because when workers have the right to organize unions, you know what they do? They organize unions, right? And unions are an organized power against forces that keep people down. And it's a way to collect money, it's a way to organize people. And historically, a lot of the unions were the first integrated organizations in this country. Not all, but a bunch of them. And so again, it feels like we've got some opportunities here in Virginia around some of that. I think we will have fights over the minimum wage this next year. Like there's a lot of different conversations around what it could be and how it would be. But those will be very interesting fights that I think we could be involved in. That again, unify people, right? They unify people across class, across race, because it really benefits everybody. And then we're gonna take on the fight around paid sick leave. 1.2 million workers in Virginia, 41% of private sector workers have no sick days, zero. No PTO, no paid anything, right? And again, to me, it's part of the history of slavery in Virginia that allows that to continue. So I think there's some opportunities in this wage space because it is the intersection of these issues and because it affects so many people. And I think we've got some possibilities to move it forward.
I had something else that I wanted to say, but I like the comment that you just made about, I think too, the important thing, and even though we're talking about the state of Virginia, and I think that's why I kind of keep resting on history and then the productive shifts, because we're moving into an era where, and this is environmental justice stuff, so I'm stepping into your realm, but we're moving into an era where environmental justice is like really, really pivotal as far as the ozone layer is concerned, and move into environmentally friendly fuel in order to reduce. And this is important. I said this at UVA, and people got mad at me, but I'm going to say it again because it's a fact. The ozone layer is integral really to white people and the variation of melanin, and that's real talk. So we have to move towards environmentally friendly fuel because the ozone layer allows the UVB and the UVA rays to touch the Earth's surface at a more intense level. Melanin, which is the key to the pigment in black people's skin, protects us against UVA and UVB rays. So if you go to the CDC and you do your own research, you will see that there is an increasing prevalence of melanoma for Caucasians. And so the government now, that's why they took that stuff off, got them to take the stuff off of the EPA website. So now you're moving towards environmentally friendly fuels, type fossil fuels, wheat, ethanol in the gas stations as opposed to the more harmful fuels. And so when you're talking about farming is going to be necessary. The one thing about farming is it's the only thing that technology cannot completely replace. You can have machinery, but it requires human labor. So now you have, we're talking about minimum wages for farmers, but how about the fact that the government has taken land away from the farmers and forced farmers through legislation to grow the crops that are going to be productive to capitalist wealth and profit development. And now we're talking about, and then the immigration laws for our Latinx people, the immigration laws are to try to push people back into Mexico and Central America so they don't have to deal with the wage labor laws here. They can exploit labor and exploit farmers in other countries. So, I'm trying to figure out, we're still operating within this context of exploitation. And so that's it. And then the second thing, the thing that I wanted to say before, so I really like what you were talking about the farmers, but I do want to point out that the farmers are getting their land stripped away. And then the second thing with intersectionality, this is what I'm asking. I sit in courtrooms with Candace Lucas. We just came from a due process hearing that Lorraine instigated for a young man that they are trying to funnel into the criminal justice system. And it sickens me as a black woman from Berry Farms, a scholar and an activist, to sit in a courtroom that is polarized by race and to watch white women in particular and white men in power to annihilate and strip black people of their voices and their ability to fight legitimately using the federal laws that are designed to protect individuals to fight legitimately for the rights of people. We cannot reach an intersectional platform until white women in particular, and I'm saying this out of love for y'all, and also anger, because I'm really mad, and I just came from court with Candace Lucas today. Until you all, if we're truly going to do real work, right, it's going to take white women to recognize the racial injustice and the way that it manifests in the justice system, because we're not getting justice in the courtrooms. Because you can't divorce, and Candace, this is the name of the book I was writing on the way over here, and I shouldn't say it, but it's coming. It's bias injustice. That's the term. And the injustice is for injustice as one word and injustice as two words, because you cannot divorce bias from justice. You can't divorce bias from legislation, right? You have white men in the General Assembly who are making rules, and there's no way that you can make rules outside of your own cognitive experience. So in order for us to truly get to a point of racial balance and true harmony and doing the real work, white women and white men have got to recognize the bias that is inherent in our socialization process as a nation, and to view the ways in which bias influences power and the way that teacher and you're teaching a black child and the black child is the other, because you don't look at the black child like that's your own child. So you can go and handcuff a 4-year-old in the public school system for pulling a temper tantrum, but you wouldn't call the police on your own son or daughter for pulling a temper tantrum in your household, right? Because they're the other, and because the historic stereotypes of what it means to be black are embedded in the minds and the subconscious of white people. And until we can get to that point, we can have these discussions until the day is long and nothing is going to change. So I'm asking my white sisters, and I'm challenging my white sisters and my white brothers to do that work. And then in spaces where you see that thing manifesting, especially in spaces where justice is supposed to be happening, like the court system, where injustice happens in the court every day, and I watch bias operate in the court every day. We need y'all to call it out, because otherwise we're just the angry black women and the mad black women, or the mad, angry, aggressive black men that don't know what they're talking about, and we're pulling out the race card out of our pockets and slamming it like it has no historic context. So I am calling intersectionality, I'm calling on my white sisters to do that work in the General Assembly, in your activist spaces, in the community. Come to court with Candace and raise your hand and do something. Let's do something.
With your black sisters on this feminist thing, and you work on that, that's just 1/3 of it. Because they got to deal with the classism and the racism. And so, it's just 1/3 when you deal with the feminist part. You got 2/3 of the battle still in these.
That reminds me of a quote that I think is so relevant. It says, when you're using privilege, equity feels like oppression. So I want you all to think about that, because again, if your frame of reference is so limited, you can't even imagine somebody else's experience. It's gonna be hard to make that change.
Right.
So, excuse me, we started off our discussion today talking a little bit about truth and about history and the history that we too often forget. We talked a little bit about faulty theology and how that is, reinforcing a lot of the white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist systems. We spoke a little bit about how folks are sometimes getting discouraged with the importance of wins. And then we also ended on the point of the importance and just the central nature of intersectionality and really breaking down a lot of those barriers that are dividing us. So for the final question, and I think Dr. Zoe, you said doing the real work. The final question about doing the real work is what is from our discussion today, what is the one thing that you want people to take away? And I guess we can go. So whoever wants to start, can jump on it. One thing you want people to remember.
I want folks to remember that as we talk about accountability, and when we talk about legislative bills, General Assembly, I need for you to start with yourself first. Check yourself first. Check your own mentality, your own paradigms, your own biases, because we all have them. And again, we're talking about lived experience, right? So challenge yourself to come out of your comfort zone, just to understand something that you might not have understood yesterday, because it's necessary. I think in our current climate, our current culture, it's not optional. It's necessary. If we're talking about the organic change that we're seeking, then we just have to do it.
I would say question everything, and then become involved in public policy. It is not reserved for people. It affects you every day in everything you do. But so many times we just let it go by. So, but that person, question everything. Question. Teaching is a two-way thing. As a professor, I don't bring everything to the class. I learn from my students. And so you question. And the same thing with religion. Stop just sitting there believing everything that person standing in the pulpit And I messed up saying here, yeah, because, you know, I'm trying to say God. And so one question, and more especially to our elected officials, because we're sending too many people to the General Assembly. They're not accountable to us. You know, they go, and, you know, they play on our emotions, but they don't give us any deliverables, no deliverables, and that's what it's all about.
So I want to start where I think it's already been said, question privilege and particular white privilege, and I really appreciate that that was said, and I want to second it, and I want to be really clear on that. I think people think there are exceptions to that rule, they think I'm hearing it, they think all kinds of things, and we don't question it enough, we don't really sit with it, we don't really get what that means, and I appreciate that, I heard it. I want to come back to what you were saying about campaign finance, because I think that's fundamental, and I think we are at a point where people are challenging campaign finance. I think in this next election, that's going to be really important. Where did your money come from? Be transparent. It's not just the racial thing, it's not just a class thing. We need to hold our elected officials accountable, and we need to see where that money's coming from. Sometimes it's not a lot of money, sometimes we're talking about a few $1,000s, sometimes we're talking about, and I'll just speak to Dominion Energy, that on both sides of the aisle gives money, and then the idea is if you speak out against us, we might come out for your opponent. So we need to think it's not a lot of money, but there's a lot of power there, and so we really need to think about those power relationships. But I want to go back to what you just said about white privilege. I mean, I really think that that's the lesson of the evening, and I really hope that everybody in this room is hearing that, particularly the white people in this room, because it was said very clearly. So I will restate it, and I will appreciate that it was said very clearly, and I'll come back to it. And I hope we say it a couple more times, because it's very important for people to really let that sink in.
I just want to say again, I think this is a very interesting moment in Virginia, and I think, you know, despite the challenges and difficulties, it feels to me like it's an opportunity. You know, again, I know lots of people who are, you know, reading, you know, white fragility in their churches, and they're doing some stuff that they might not have done 6 months ago. And, you know, so it feels to me like there's that, you know, in the crisis moments, there's always opportunities, and that I think it's an opportunity right now that we should all do our best to take advantage of.
Well, let's give our panelists one round of applause.
I'll make it quick so you can think. I think I have 2 takeaway moments. My first takeaway moment, my sister so eloquently got the white privilege, so I'm going to leave that. I think my 2 takeaway moments is, one, to understand the root of oppression. You have to always understand the root, and the root is important, just like in gardening. You can have a root of oppression, and you can pluck the stem, you can pluck the leaves, you can pluck the petals, and even if you pluck it out of the ground, you may not see it anymore, but if the root still exists, it's going to grow the same oppression. Dandelion roots don't grow rose bushes. And so we have to understand the root of oppression in our planning for change and next steps. And I had something else that was really important, but I just got a senior moment, and so okay, now that all of our panelists have spoken, let's give them all a big round. And right before we break, I do want to remind all of you that this wonderful panel discussion has been brought to you by Bridging the Gap in Virginia today. They are hard at work providing a bridge to success to those men and women struggling with addiction, incarceration, chronic homelessness, and lack of employability. They are really on the front lines, reducing recidivism, homelessness, unemployment, and relapse. And so I used to be a little afraid of making the ask,
this work, that are on the front lines, that are thinking about this day in, day night, day in, day night. Day in, day out. I'm thinking about this work in the middle of the night. And so I want to encourage all of you, if you have not already supported Bridging the Gap in Virginia, to do that during this break period. And with that being said, we're going to start a short break. If you have an index